Hello and welcome everyone to another Jungian analysis video of Neon Genesis Evangelion. In my last video I described the personas and the shadows of the characters in the show. In this video I want to take a closer look at the archetypes they represent and how this affects the story. Now if you want to understand this video I do recommend you watch the previous one. This video will also contain spoilers if you haven't finished the series or haven't seen End of Eva. This video also may or may not destroy your will to live and leave you violently squirting of the sleeping body of a whiny man baby. Anyway, let's get started. The character I want to start with is Shinji. One of the very apparent archetypes Shinji has in him is the pure Eternus, the eternal child archetype in Jungian psychology. It is used in mythology to designate a child god who is forever young, Peter Pan being a good example of this, and it certainly has got positive aspects. As the divine child, it can symbolize newness, potential for growth, and hope for the future. It can also foreshadow the hero that the child sometimes becomes, like Hercules. There is a shadow side, however, and that is the child man, who refuses to grow up and meet the challenges of life head on, waiting instead for a ship to come in and solve all of his problems. This is very apparent in Shinji. He has a very passive, submissive nature and doesn't want to take action. The pure leads a provisional life. His life is never what he wants it to be, but he doesn't take action to change it. The complex of the pure Eternus can be caused by unsuccessfully integrating the Anima, the female aspect in man which I described in my last video. As Jung said about the Anima in man, the Anima intensifies, exaggerates and mythologizes all emotional relations with its work and with other people of both sexes. When the Anima is strongly constellated, she softens the man's character, making him touchy, irritable, moody and unadjusted. Alright, well, let's see if Shinji exhibits any of these traits.
Please help me. Somebody help me! Don't leave me alone! Don't abandon me! Please don't kill me!
Oh dear. As I've also said in my last video, the women in Shinji's life represent his anima and manifest themselves in his dreams. And there is one woman who is front and center in his dreams. Asuka. Asuka in Shinji's mind represents the archetype of the witch and was used by Jung to explain the nature of the anima in man's mind. As he says, the anima changes into all sorts of shapes like a witch. Occasionally she causes states of fascination that rival the best bewitchment, or unleashes terrors in us not to be outdone by any manifestation of the devil. She is a mischievous being who crosses our path in numerous transformations and disguises, playing all kinds of tricks on us. This again symbolizes how important integrating the anima is for man's development. This fluid nature of the anima is also seen in Asuka's visions, in episode 22 when one of the angels confronts her with the different aspects of herself. We see the preppy Asuka, we see the blunt and rude Asuka, and the conniving and manipulative Asuka. These conflicting parts of her character can be caused by Asuka's lack of a positive mother figure. Asuka's past trauma has led her to denounce everything that has anything to do with her mother. She wants to be the best Eva pilot in the world and so adopted a very competitive and driven attitude. You could say a very manly attitude. Now there's nothing wrong with this, being driven gets things done. But as shown before, identifying too strongly with certain traits can lead to these traits overpowering us. In this case I would say Asuka is overpowered by her Animus, the man in woman's psyche. And a woman possessed by the Animus is in danger of losing her femininity. We see the struggle in Asuka's vision. We see the witch archetype on one end of the spectrum in her sometimes cruel attitude towards Shinji, the witch in this case representing the woman in her demonic aspect. Devouring, isolated and phallic, representing everything that is despised and rejected in the feminine. On the other hand we see the enchantress, sexually voracious, a siren and a Circe who looks down on men and traps them and turns them into swine. These archetypes manifest themselves in the real world in her behavior towards Shinji. One moment she pushes him away and the next she is sexually provocative towards him. A character that I haven't really talked about that much however is Rei. The reason for that is to talk about Rei is to spoil the story, but let's talk about Rei. Rei is best symbolized by the mother archetype. Differently from Asuka, Rei gives Shinji advice on how to deal with his father, and asks him to see things from his perspective. As the story progresses, we see him more at ease with her and confiding in her. This caring and nurturing, but also sometimes strict aspects, are all traits of the Great Mother. However, when I say that Rei is a mother figure for Shinji, that is exactly what she is. She is literally his mother. Rei is the cloned body of Shinji's mom, who has the soul fragment of the angel Lilith inside of her. Lilith, we find out, is the progenitor of the human race. Her crash landing on Earth sparked the beginning of human life. This makes Rei not just Shinji's mother, but the Great Mother archetype itself. At the same time, we are introduced to another important character, Kaoru. Kaoru, like Rei, is a very mysterious character, talking in riddles, although he is kind to Shinji, treating him like a human being instead of like an instrument as Gendo does. Kaoru, we find out, is a being made by Seal out of Adam's, the first angel's DNA, and has Adam's soul fragment fused into him. If Rei is the mother, then Kaoru can be seen as the father archetype. At least for Shinji he is. We find out that Gendo has a fragment of Adam fused into his body, so Kaoru can be said to be the spiritual form of Gendo, raised to a divine level, Shinji's spiritual father. We later find out that Kaoru was sent to Nerve by Seal to merge with the body of Lilith. Seal wanted this to usher in the third impact, which would lead to them becoming gods. This merging between Rei and Kaoru can be seen as the Sysygy. The Sysygy stands for the individuation process and is the merging of opposites. The merging between conscious and unconscious, between mother and father, between Anima and Animus. There were multiple ways how the third impact could be achieved. One was by a direct merging of Kaoru and Rei, but another is by using the mass-produced Evas to kidnap Shinji and Eva Unit 01. The mass-produced Evas had Kaoru's thought palace in them and so represent the spiritual father. And Eva Unit 01 was made by using Lilith's DNA and so represents Rei, the Great Mother. Shinji's role in all of this is to be a sacrifice. This makes Shinji the divine Christ child, the other side of the child archetype. The child paves the way for a future change of personality. In the individuation process, it anticipates the figure that comes from the synthesis of conscious and unconscious elements. It stands for the unintegrated unconscious, a symbol for the potential of individuation. Jung saw the child as a compensation for the one-sidedness of the conscious mind, the natural result of the concentration on a few contents to the exclusion of all else. This can be seen in the characters struggling with their inner desires and demons, not wanting to admit what is inside of them or willing to face their shadows, but it can also be seen as modern man's emphasis on science and logic, often at the expense of the inner world, a disenchantment, as Max Weber would call it. The child archetype in this personifies our most vital urge to realize the self, and so has great power. So Shinji, like Rei and Kaoru, represents the individuation process. However, this process is never painless. Individuation is costly and Shinji is the Christ child, meaning he'll have to sacrifice something, and be sacrificed himself. This sacrifice is also seen in Asuka as she fights the mass-produced Evas. Before the fight, she is visited by the soul fragment of her mother in the Eva unit. Because of this, she stops seeing her mother as the devouring mother and accepts her as a nurturing and healing force. Asuka faces her shadows and comes out of the experience reinvigorated with a new outlook on life. After that, however, this happens. Asuka losing an eye is very symbolic. Jung would say that she hasn't lost the eye, it has become inverted, an inward-facing eye, the eye that forever looks at the underworld and at the shadow. That is the reality of individuation. You lose something of yourself. Some part of you is bitten off by the Leviathan and stays in the abyss. After this, the third impact happens and everybody gets tanked. As you can see from these images, the third impact is a psychedelic experience, and the visions Shinji has are chock full of symbolism. To analyze it all would make this an hour-long video, so I'll limit myself to a few. A few very obvious symbols are the image of the Eva Unit 01 crucified, referring to the Christ and sacrifice motive. The enormous alien figure of Rei and Kaoru that we see refers to the Sysygy, the unification of opposites. But the receptacle that Ray captures everybody's soul in looks a lot like a Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone is something that is featured in alchemy but also in psychology. In psychology, the stone stands for individuation. As Jung said, the unity of the stone is the equivalent of individuation, by which we are made one. We would say that the stone is a projection of the unified self. The stone is seen much earlier in the story, in the course of the angels and the Evas, symbolizing their importance to the individuation process, and also in a vision of Shinji giving the stone to his mother, prophesizing his role as the Christ child. During the third impact, Rei describes the world that she and Shinji are in as a world made of LCL, the primordial soup of life. A world without your own shape. An ambiguous world where it is impossible to tell where you end and other people start. A fragile world where you exist everywhere and thus nowhere. Now what this reminds me of is something called ego death. Ego death is described by some as the complete loss of subjective self-identity, the death of the need to hold on to separate self-centered existence. I think this is what is happening with Shinji during the third impact. This is the sacrifice that he's making. With Jung, however, ego death means something else. It is a fundamental transformation of the psyche necessary to radically improve the quality of life. It is not so much an end, but a rebirth after the individuation process. During the third impact, Shinji is given the choice between these two forms of ego death. One is a world without individual selves, without pain or fear or uncertainty. A world where you don't exist as an individual. The other is to be born anew with new insights, but to be thrust back into a world full of pain and struggle. Shinji chooses the latter and wakes up from his dream on a beach next to Asuka. Now I'm going to step out of my role as a Jungian psychologist and assume the role of the fanboy that I ultimately am. Alright. I love this ending. I fucking love this ending. Here you have two people who are completely dysfunctional and who are given a choice to not die exactly, but to not exist anymore. Shinji, who has some very fucked up coping mechanisms, and Asuka, whose brash attitude hides an enormous trauma, and you would perfectly understand from both of them if they choose to not exist. But they choose to live in a world that is a blasted ruin, without knowing if they'll make it and survive. And Shinji, well, he does this, expecting Asuka to either do nothing and prove to him that he's still in the LCL world, or to fight him off and so prove that he's in the real world. Also, he just might be insane at this point. Instead, Asuka does this. Shinji very understandably collapses, crying, and Asuka, even though having reached individuation, is still Asuka, and says, So there you have it. Shinji and Asuka as a fucked up Adam and Eve. But you know what? It's a fucked up world. And if these two people have the courage to live in a broken, dysfunctional world, then maybe we can as well. Neon Genesis to me is about individuation, yes, but it's also about hope. Hope that will make it in this broken world. This was my second video about the Jungian psychology of Neon Genesis Evangelion. I hope you liked it, like if you liked it, subscribe if you want more content, and see you next time.